For more, I'm joined here in the studio by Justin Crump. He's a military veteran, a terrorism expert and CEO of Sibylline, an international intelligence and risk analysis consultancy based in the UK. Justin, welcome to the studio.
Thank you,
We just saw the fighting there in Khan Yunis. It's been described as the most intense in the war so far. Why is it the most intense so far?
I think, obviously, Israel's been slowly mounting this operation. They've seen quite hard fighting in northern Gaza. But in some ways, the operation in northern Gaza was easier than perhaps we expected. They made progress more quickly than perhaps you might expect. And I think the Israeli assessment at the time was a lot of people, of course, had fled northern Gaza, including some of the Hamas fighters. And Khan Yunis has always been a pretty important base for Hamas, obviously, as one of the two major centres in the Gaza Strip. So Israel was always focused on that area as being the more political headquarters of Hamas in Gaza. They knew its importance, and I think their sense was a lot of people had moved there from the fighting elements of Hamas. And certainly that's why I think the fighting in the northern part's been a lot easier than expected. And of course, Israel told people, move south of the Wadi Gaza. And of course, that told Hamas also, move away from northern Gaza. It's where the first military operation will take place. So this is a culminating area.
So are we going to see different sorts of Israeli operations in the south than we did in the north? And if so, in what way?
I think it's very similar tactics. And Israel has been following an approach that was used in Mosul. It was used in Basra, actually, back in 2003 when I was there. And that's this approach of securing areas, moving in to cities and urban areas and multiple different axes to strike particular targets in those areas. You think of an old-fashioned siege, you'd surround a city and then you'd bombard it and gradually move in. This is about seizing key bits of ground inside a city, securing the routes in, and then having areas you can operate safely from and striking out. And that's all related to Israel's desire to go after particular target areas where they think Hamas are in Khan Yunis.
And as they are doing this, we are seeing the civilian casualties, the civilian toll mount. At the same time, there is pressure from the United States and from other quarters for Israel to do more to avoid civilian casualties. Civilians don't really have anywhere else to go. That's what the UN is saying. Yeah. Do you see any change in Israeli tactics so that they can avoid the civilian casualties that have been registered so far?
I mean, sadly not. And I think it's hard not to be moved by the scale of destruction that we see in Gaza and the suffering of the people there. And of course, the fact is that Hamas has sort of offered them up for martyrdom, really. I mean, they knew what would happen with Israel. But Israel itself is actually sort of weirdly proud of the statistic at the moment that I think there have been 15,000 dead in Gaza at the moment, of which Israel is saying, well, 5,000 we think are Hamas fighters, who of course they've gone to kill. You'd expect that number to be up. But they're sort of saying actually a ratio of 2 dead civilians to 1 Hamas fighter is pretty good, isn't it? That's sort of the Israeli approach to this. And I think, of course, a lot of the world is saying that's too much. We accept that if you do an operation in these circumstances, there are going to be civilian casualties. It's impossible to avoid completely, but this is not a ratio that the rest of the world finds acceptable. Israel, I think, says, no, this is actually pretty good. If you look at what we're doing, we think this is reasonable, and that is the problem. The rest of the world, I don't think, agrees with that ratio.
But does this also not feed into a further cycle of violence and becomes a problem for Israel? Because the higher the civilian tolls, doesn't that mean there'll be a recruitment push, in a sense, and also the relatives of those who have died, do they not become the Hamas fighters of the future, becoming a problem for Israel in the future?
Yeah, I was asked once years ago, what next after al-Qaeda? And I said, another iteration of al-Qaeda, for example. I think with Hamas, in itself, it's an iteration of previous groups. There will be other groups afterwards. So Israel's mission to destroy Hamas makes no sense militarily. The military can do the best job they can. They could eliminate the leadership, they can destroy missile launching facilities, but they won't eliminate the idea of Hamas. And while some Gazans are turning against Hamas and did before, in fact, the events 2 months ago today, the other people in Gaza, of course, will sympathise with Hamas. They will resent Israel for these actions, of course. And it's going to fuel a cycle, as it always has done, unless there is a very big change at the end of this. It's hard to see, though, at the moment what that change will be. I mean, and once Gaza is left as this ruined wasteland, what comes next?
Do you see an Israeli plan at all? Do you think Israel is factoring this in? This is not the first time they've been in Gaza.
No, and they've gone through this cycle before of go in, retaliate. There's a clock running of how long Israel supporters will allow the operation to continue before they say enough. And then things reset. They've been through that cycle again and again. So they are aware of this. But politically, I think they are paralysed with the need to fulfil this mission that the government has now assigned the military. But the fact that, again, a military mission alone will not solve this problem. It needs something more comprehensive, and it needs support for the people of Gaza once this is finished and the rebuilding.
We'll leave it there for the time being. But thanks so much for coming into the studio, Justin Crump, CEO of Civilian and terrorism expert. Thanks so much.